It's live now, Owen.
That's lovely. Mr. Chairman, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening and welcome everyone to the Scrutiny panel of Colchester Council on Tuesday the 13th of October 2020. My name is Councillor Kevin Bentley. I'm the chair of the Scrutiny panel. Very shortly I will ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves. I come from the Marks Tay and Leigh Ward, elected from them, and I'll be chairing throughout this entire meeting tonight. Now, this meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet and on the Council's YouTube channel, and will also be available to watch afterwards as well. Just a few notes of housekeeping to bear in mind. With the exception of myself and Mr. Howell, who's the Democratic Officer here, could I ask everyone, please, which you have already, thank you, to go on to mute. Everyone's well conditioned to do this now. And if you wish to speak, could you please indicate, and I'll make sure we come to you at that point. When I call your name, could you please unmute yourself? That just stops any background noise coming into the rest of the meeting. I will ask for each item of business to be presented, and just, I'll say it again later, but I take the view that we have read all the papers, so we don't need to go through the papers, but you'll have the opportunity to point anything out to us you wish to, and we'll go into the sessions of questions. And then I will ask each of the panel members to ask any questions they wish to. I tend to do it in order by calling names, and I change those names in order around so everyone gets to go at being first and second. It's just an easy way to do it rather than trying to put up hands, so I will call you out. We've joined, I'm pleased to say, by many cabinet members this evening. It's good to see you all, and officers. If anyone wishes to speak on an item, please can you just indicate, and either I or Mr. Howell will see you, and we'll make sure we come to you. But please give us plenty of warning if you're going to do that. And at the end of each item, where we need to take a vote, even if it's noting, because it's online, I will ask Mr. Howell to conduct the vote. And if it's to note, we will say note or we approve, or as the case would be. So it's all done formally, and we know. With so many people on the Zoom, I just don't want a sort of general agreement, but rather for the point of democracy, everyone had a chance to say how they wish to vote on each item. And depending on business, we may take a break at 7:30 if we are still going. We only have 3 items, but they're quite meaty items. So if we are still going at 7:30, we will take a break for 10 minutes or so to give everyone rest and make sure that they can come back refreshed. Right, so I will now go to each of the panel members, and just the order I've got at the moment, but again, it will change for the questions. Can I please ask each panel member to introduce themselves and then to say where they're from as well. Councillor Dundas first.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Paul Dundas, representing Stanway Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Councillor Tina Bourne, representing Greenstead Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Councillor Lorcan Whitehead, representing Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Good evening, Councillor Mike Hogg from St Anne's and St John's Wards.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Good evening, Councillor McCarthy, representing Shrub End.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
Good evening, Councillor Chris Hayter from St John's and St Anne's Ward.
And I see Councillor McLean has joined us now. Councillor McLean, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Councillor McLean, Marks Tay and Leigh Ward. Sorry, I'm late.
No, you're just in time, which is perfect. Thank you. And I was just coming on to substitutions, of which you are one, aren't you? Could you just explain why you're at the meeting?
Substituting for Pat Moore.
No, for Lewis Barber.
Lewis Barber, sorry.
So an additional mastermind there. Get the right answer. Anyway, it's good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Right, item 3, there are no urgent items. Item 4, are there any declarations of interest? And don't forget, if you think a one-on-one comes up as we're discussing it, you can raise that at any point, and as long as we know, we can record it as whatever interest that may be.
Chairman, could I ask, Chairman, do we have to declare the receipt of locality budget money?
I wouldn't have thought so, but I will just take advice on that. Otherwise, we'll be here all night while we all declare it. So,
Yes.
It's a council function.
In general, no, but if it pertains to anything that's directly brought up in this meeting, then it's probably best to declare it just in case.
Okay, so done.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Item number 5, the minutes. So you've seen the minutes of the 27th of July and also the 17th of August. There were 2 sets there. I'm going to go around and ask each of you, or rather I won't, Mr. Howell will very shortly, to issue the vote to whether you agree or not. And if you need any amendments, then please let us know when you speak. So, Mr. Howell, could you please administer that vote, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll take them both together en bloc, if I may. So proceeding through, Councillor Bourne.
Agreed.
For Councillor Dundas.
Agreed.
Agreed. Councillor Hayter.
Agreed.
Agreed. Councillor Hogg.
Agreed.
Agreed. Councillor McLean.
Wasn't there, so I don't think she can.
I'll mark an
Well, you can do,
abstention
but
if she's happy with that. Councillor McLean, are you happy for me to mark an abstention? Sorry, you're on mute at the moment, Councillor McLean. I'll come back to you if I may. Councillor McCarthy.
I'm sorry, I'd lost all sound of everything.
I
lost
right.
the connection. Sorry.
Not a problem. So yeah, you're happy for me to mark you down as abstaining from that one?
I didn't hear it, so you can, yes.
Yes, it was just to confirm the minutes of the last two meetings.
Yeah, okay,
yeah.
No problem.
Okay, brilliant. Councillor McCarthy.
Agreed.
Agreed. Councillor Whitehead.
Agreed.
Agreed. And Mr. Chairman.
Yes, agreed. Thank you.
Agreed. So agreed. That's lovely. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on then to item 6. We have no general have your say speakers. Item 7, there are no decisions taken under special emergency provisions. Item 8, cabinet and portfolio holder decisions according for review. There are none. There are no items requested by panel members or any other members to be discussed. So we'll be the substantive business of the evening, which item number 10, the budget for 21-22 and the medium-term financial forecast. Colleagues, unless anyone has any objections, I have the view that we have read and gone through the papers, and therefore I'm going to invite Mr. Cook, who's the head of finance and section 15 officer, to present, and I would have thought as well, Councillor King. Mr. Owen.
Yes, sorry, just Councillor King's raised his hand.
Yes, Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I thought it helpful if I start. And
I was just coming to you. I was just coming to you.
I know you
So
were.
I was about to say, and Councillor King as well. Floor's yours.
Thank you, Chair. Taking your injunction that the papers are as read, Paul and I will walk you through this, but there's a few points I'd like to make to start us off. In the circumstances we're in, there's only one certainty, and that is every forecast will change. This is the third scrutiny session since the spring and the third report to Cabinet, and I'm grateful for the responses from scrutiny and members. We've had 3 budget workshops also, as well as briefing group leaders regularly on the national local economic position, the challenges for the business and for the council, and how we are balancing the books, and we will as we must, and how we're addressing recovery. 3 points for me to make, and then I'll pass to Paul. Firstly, that the macroeconomic picture, how often do you get to say that, more this year than before, is particularly challenging. Recovery in August was slower than expected. The OBR forecasts a slow climb back to perhaps 12% under earlier GDP. And as we illustrate at 5.5, further significant coronavirus outbreaks will depress economic activity. This is not an abstract. This will impact on our town and our people, and it will impact upon our income levels as a council. The uncertainty and volatility for local businesses and residents, and thus for our commercial income, for our council tax and our business rates and government support, are all part of the package we've sought to address in this third paper. It is as much about principle and approach as anything else. We want them, government, to keep the promise about costs and impacts, but that will be challenging. We want to, and we will, do our best to secure the maximum receipts and returns and to maximise our commercial income. But this will be an extraordinarily challenging time all the way through this financial year and beyond. So we will, Chair, be back to you and the panel again in the autumn, I have no doubt, because the best way of approaching this is the way we've adopted, which is on the month, checking what we see, what we know, how it bears down and fits with our experience and how we can respond. So perhaps the most important point I want to just stress is our budgeting approach. It has to reflect the context I've described, our actual experience. Income is still very depressed. The rates of tax collection, which are holding up well, but are down on previous years at the same point, and I suspect have been helped by grants and support and will weaken further. And what we know of government policy and potential support, where we, like others, will have to wait the comprehensive spending review and settlements later this year. In these circumstances, this is a paper about what we know and can glimpse, about prudent principle and progress being made to secure the savings needed. Separate paper follows, at least impact on services. And we're here to answer your questions. I'll take those now or hand to Paul for a few more points.
Thank you indeed, Councillor King. Perhaps I could just ask Mr. Cook if he wishes to add anything, then we'll open it up to the panel.
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor King has covered most of the points. The second recommendation, the Cabinet report, just perhaps very briefly on that. This is about the business rate pool for Essex, which has been quite a successful thing for Colchester and other authorities over the last few years. Because of forecast losses on the business rates by various authorities, we're still working on whether or not it will be advantageous for there to be a business rates pool in 21-22. And we need to let MHCLG know by the 23rd of October. So in the Cabinet report, we're seeking delegated authority for David in liaison with myself to finalise the most advantageous arrangements. I think other than that, the report sets out the progress we've made today. I think you have a separate report on your agenda detailing all the savings, and in the appendices to this budget report, we set out all the assumptions that are building the MTFF at this stage. But as Councillor King was saying, I think we will be coming back to yourselves and Cabinet on a number of occasions before we get to the budget setting in January and February. Thank you.
Mr. Cook, thank you. Can I say at this stage before I go to colleagues that over many years of now being on the Borough Council, these papers are set out superbly. Budgeting can be very difficult, and it can be very difficult to follow, even for the most learned of councillors, but these are very easy to follow, very well set out, and I just want to commend you on that as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and also the work of Councillor King too, so he's heavily involved in this work, so thank you. I'm going to go to councillors in this order, so I'll give you fair warning. We'll go to Councillor Bourne first, then Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Hogg, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Hayter, Councillor McLean, and Councillor Dundas, and I'll come in at the end. So just fair warning, and I will remind you as we go through. So we'll go to Councillor Bourne first, then followed by Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. Always nice to be first. I'm just wondering about the comparator groups charts that you have there. As you go through budget setting process, obviously some of those will change, not just the comparator group, but all the financial benchmarking. When do you foresee that you will take a increase your robust response to budgeting over the next few months? So really, it's when can we expect as the scrutiny panel to have some idea about our actual projections going forward? We have them at this moment in time, but I am acutely aware, as is everyone else, that with the national situation at the moment, it is a moving feast. So when can we expect our budgeting to be more secure?
Let the politician give an answer, and some Paul can correct me, which will be amusing. My own view is it's as Paul said. We're going to hang on all the way through to early next year. Month on month, we'll know more about the impact in this financial year, so we'll be clearer on our starting point for next. As you'll see in the paper, we're making sensible assumptions consistent with the 90% economy that we're going to be down on every measure at the beginning of the next financial year, and that will go through to the following. But we will have much better information about where we are at the end of this year and as we go into next year about our reality. And that would include, will it not, wave 2. So in terms of your second point, personally, I'll just say to all of you, I think this is, I reflect the chair's words back to him. I think this is cracking work by the team. And it's the best we can give you. That's what we'll continue to give you. The volatility will be less the closer we get to the point of closure, but we're going to have to build into our estimates next year a degree of flex. That's certainly my direction to the team, and it's the approach that Paul's taken. So the way to look at this, in my view, is when we get at any point in the journey, we will have some assurance built into the numbers at any one time. So at any one moment, now and later, these will be reliable enough in terms of our fundamental duty, make good decisions on staffing and other numbers, and ensure that we will be able to balance the books, which, I sort of start and end with that, if I may say so. Just accept that the final numbers will differ from the estimate, but it's sound enough. Peer group, Paul might want to talk to. That's a SIPFA given. We'll take that as it is, and we'll watch with their performance, and we'll benchmark ourselves.
Thank you. Did you share anything, Mr. Cook?
Just in response to Councillor Bourne, that we keep looking at what other Essex authorities are doing. For the comparator group, we may be able to access the COVID financial returns that are made monthly to MHCLG. So certainly by January, we'll attempt to have a much stronger comparative base to help members make the final budget decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bourne, any other points?
No, I just wondered, thank you for those responses. I just wondered, Chair, if there's, with those comparative positions with our own neighbouring local authorities, could we not partner up and share them amongst ourselves as a set of districts and boroughs, local districts and boroughs? Because the Essex response and the Essex recovery response is important to all of us, including Colchester. Can we not just have a gentleman's agreement, or even a ladies' agreement? To
sorry, is that a question to Councillor King or for us as a panel? Just on
for a panel.
Yeah, no, there's a reason we shouldn't. I think you can make that a recommendation at the end if you want to start scribbling away. I think that's a very good idea, actually. Good. Right, let's go to Councillor Whitehead, and then followed by Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the reports. I've a couple of questions. My first one is a short one. I think it's useful when we have you here as the people with the the hands on the purse strings and knowing what's going on in our budgets. At the outset of this situation that we're in, Robert Jenrick said that the government would provide whatever funding is needed for councils to get through this and come out the other side. So my first question is, in your considered view, has that happened yet? I think it'd be useful to know. My second question is, I think something that's on a lot of people's minds, certainly in our part of the country at the moment, is the prospect of a second wave. I notice in the report we've got that image from the PwC forecast, the contained spread scenario versus the further outbreak scenario. That's 5.5. A big stark gap between two lines on that graph. And a little bit further on in the report, 12.2, it says that we've not amended the MTFF to factor in the possibility of a second wave, understandably, since nothing's hit yet. But I guess my question is, how are we set to cope? Should we be hit by a second wave? Presumably that's going to make the picture even more difficult. So how are we kind of set to have to push for even more out of these budgets without further support from outside? Thank you.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lorcan. Let me start us off, and Paul can follow up. The first point's a political one, really. We have to acknowledge that there was a public promise made, one of many, which was all costs and all impacts would be met. Certainly, that's how it sounded. It's how it's taken. If you look at the numbers this year, the sort of big picture, the impacts on income and dividend losses, council tax loss, business rates loss, and COVID additional costs, you get to a number of about 11.5 million. The grants and support, including further that we've had, will eat into that very nicely, but the net loss, so here's to your point, will be something like, we think, right? Because there's a complex, as Paul can explain, the formula requires us to always judge the reality, and then there's a kind of an offset balancing arrangement. It's good in one way, but not in others. But the bottom line loss at the moment we expect to be about 4.3 million. So that's to your first point. In terms of second wave and the illustrations of that, Paul and I wanted that in because you can debate the charts, and we looked at several, because it does what you've just said. It makes the link I tried to make at the very beginning, that really unusual but really understandable link between the impact of repeated interruptions to normal life and thus economic activity. And then we just have that there as a reminder that there has to be an impact on our income, which is your second point. How we cope with that is by, in terms of budgeting, is by taking a prudent view of the impact, by taking account of what we know. And what we know is the period since March, when there was virtually no income, and then it's grown. So we'll be able to take a sort of a moderate view, central assessment, if you like. And I've asked Paul and the team, and Paul's done this again in the last few days, a lot of modelling in the spring. We refreshed it recently to look at scenarios of high central and lower risk. Well, lower risk is still pretty significant. So our estimating is just looking at the impacts, and we're going to share that because it came up also in the members' workshop. But as you can imagine, that both on cost and income, we know there will be the volatilities, back to my earlier point. All we can do, and the assurance I give the committee, is make sure as we work our way through the rest of the year, we're going to be on the prudent side of that central set of scenarios, that central range. But we cannot predict more than within a range how this is going to end up. We'll have to rely upon our best efforts on taking cost out, raising income where we're able to do just that. And of course, we will have to fall back on reserves we built up in previous times, which Paul's looking forward to rebuilding a couple of years from now.
Thank you. Mr. Cook, did you wish to add anything? You don't have to.
Just to say that obviously in 2021, Chair, we do have the MHCLG income loss grant. It's not yet announced that there'll be any such grant in 21-22. So if we're going to lobby, that might be a good thing to do. Thank you.
Yes, good, understood. Thank you. Back to you, Councillor Whitehead, or are you done?
I think that's it for me from now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, no problem at all. And just say to colleagues, normally in the room, of course, I would just ask for put your hand up. So I'm coming to you individually. It doesn't mean you're absolutely forced to ask a question. If you don't want to, you don't have to. It just gives you the opportunity. Councillor Hogg next, and then Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor King and Mr. Cook for putting this together. Bearing in mind there are so many unknowns and variables, putting this paper together at times, I'm sure it must have been like juggling jelly to put this paper together. I'm concerned about the use of reserves. How far can we go to a baseline to maintain prudent reserves before we have to start jacking up charges across the borough? There has to be a prudent level of reserves. We're faced here with the opportunity or we may have to call on further reserves. Are you confident that we can maintain a prudent level of reserves? That's it, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Paul, after a brief remark from me, to pick this up because he's done a lot of work and he's set it out in some detail in the report. But it is nonetheless quite a complicated picture. So it may help, Chair, if just walk through that briefly. From my perspective, I absolutely do have confidence with the circumstances we know and the depth of reserves that we've got, that we are good for the periods we're talking about. Now, what may follow 3 years on, if the rise back turns to a fall away, is a completely different matter. Against the context we have, no, I'm comfortable. The reserves are there for a purpose, exceptional use. These are exceptional times. I'm cool on it, and they are robust enough and significant enough, from my perspective, for us to feel sure we don't have to go crazy in terms of raising charges and impacting on our residents more than is absolutely unavoidable by prudent realignment of cost and fee and so on. So I'll go to Paul to just perhaps pull out a few points about the reserves and how he sees them.
Thank you, Councillor King. One of the main reserves we have is the pension deficit reserve, and we do gain significantly every 3 years by paying our deficit contribution to the pension fund in advance for the 3 years. So I think we should maintain that practice if at all possible. And then other reserves we have, there could be a budgetary implication if we use them to deal with COVID issues, because, for example, renewal and repairs have been set aside over a number of financial years to replace key assets. So we're watching the reserve position very carefully. At the moment, we think this is a sustainable level, but in January next year, you will have a more detailed statutory report from me on the level of reserve. So we'll keep working on it right up to that stage. Thank you.
Mr. Cook, thank you. Councillor Hogg, anything further?
No, that's fine, Chairman. Thank you very much. I'm sure we're in safe hands.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor McCarthy next, followed by Councillor Hayter. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry to be so boring, but I don't have any questions at this moment in time.
No, that's perfectly fine. Councillor Hayter there, followed by Councillor McLean.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As ever, thank you for the reports. Great depth, and having to change all the time with how fast everything's moving is really good to hear. The questions I've got is quite current, really. We've got a lot of talk at the moment about the new tiers that are going to be coming into place. Now, I would imagine each tier will have a different financial impact on our finances going forward. I'm going to assume that you guys have are working now to what that impact could be, depending on where we end up or how we can progress through any potential scenarios. Now we've got a bit of a picture of what could happen.
I'd say yes to that, Chris. It goes back to the point about modelling and scenarios. We'll be refining our view. It is making the best of what you know, taking the information, the impacts you see. We at least have the experience of the last few months. We know footfall's been strong in the town. That drives car park and other incomes. We know Leisure World and our leisure industries have been really severely impacted. They've recovered a degree. So we're going to have to look at the rules as they're and what's confirmed later this week, I suspect, in terms of our own status and standing, and then we'll have to track it week on week, really, but certainly month on month.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Cook, anything to add? And you don't have to, but if you'd like to.
That's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter, anything else?
No, thank you.
Lovely. Okay. Councillor McLean, then followed by Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad to hear we're keeping an eye on everything. We're balancing everything, because I'm in business as well. It is across the board for all of us, I think, at the moment. It is very worrying, and we see the second wave coming. We've just got to sit tight and ride it out as best we can. With our present projects that are going on, Are we managing to keep those going so when we can reopen to full steam, they will be ready to go so that we can maximise profits on that front as well? Because I just feel, I know we are in these troubled times, but as long as we're looking forward to where we can go with the revamping Leisure World, keeping things up to speed, so they will be ready to just go straight to work.
Councillor King.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jackie. Absolutely. We're monitoring all our capital programs and projects. We're letting members know and the public know as necessary what the impacts are. But absolutely, once the hesitations, the national lockdown, and all that impacted had been worked through, and new practices have been agreed, it's been foot to the pedal as much as we can. There are some exceptions. There are some. Northern Gateway Sports Park is such a fantastic facility for us all. Sorry about the clock, Chair. It's 1:30.
No, we used to. It's a major feature in these scrutiny meetings now.
It certainly is. I'll try and avoid the hour if I can. Paul will have to talk then. But no, absolutely. And thank you for the question, because it's more than revenue. It's about capital projects. It's about Councillor Fox's what his work he oversees with housing for all the cabinet on behalf of you. We're trying to keep, and our residents, trying to keep things moving as best we can. There will be delays and difficulties and extra cost because of the commercial implications and the circumstances we're in. But absolutely, we're pushing ahead as best we can. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor McLean, anything else?
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Let's go to Councillor Dundas, then followed by me. Oh, Mr. Howell, sorry.
Councillor Julie Young has her hand raised.
Okay, is it on this particular point, or can I go finishing with the panellists first? May I just ask, Councillor Young?
It was just to say that certainly the museum staff are trying as best they can to think of innovative ways to bring visitors into the castle, for example. So even in the light of our new restrictions, we're still trying to sort of provide services to families to do sort of, bespoke tours of the castle in small groups. So we're constantly looking at ways that we can still bring money into the authority, even in the light of the current circumstances. So I just wanted, in answer to Councillor McLean's question about, are we ready to take advantage? Well, we're still trying to bring money in as best we can.
Young, thank you. Very, very helpful. Thank you. Let's go then to Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the paper this evening. Firstly, thank you to Mr. Cook, who's already managed to answer my question on business rates without me asking it. So very efficient. The only other question I have is perhaps to follow up on a little bit which Councillor Hayter said. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we probably are in the second wave, or if we're not in it, it's certainly coming. We've put a figure in there in paragraph 14.4 of up to £1 million a month of possible impact. I just wonder if you'd expand a little bit on what that figure is. Is that absolute worst case scenario, nobody allowed out their house, sort of total lockdown sort of figure, which we're not fortunately quite at yet, and where you think, looking at things are going in terms of tier 2 and tier 3, where you think we are sort of on the graph, if you like, between extra impact and £0 and that £1 million worst case scenario, if it is indeed the worst case scenario.
Mr. King.
I'll ask Paul to take this one. I'll reflect.
No problem at all. Yeah, no, Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Chair. Well, if we just talk briefly about the key sales fees and charges items, car parking is one that we're budgeting to receive about £4 million a year. So you can see if that were lost almost completely, that's quite a significant hit. Commercial rents is a very difficult one, because if we see a very large economic downturn, that could be badly affected. That's about a budget of £3 million. And then sport and leisure, again, if those facilities were closed completely, again, we could be losing quite a significant amount. That's £3 million a year, plus other income sources that are at a lower level, plus business rates, plus council tax. So you can see, there's quite a combination of items that if the economy severely turned down, we could lose a very significant amount per month, albeit now we do have income loss support in 2021.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Dundas, anything
Yeah,
further?
I think so. I think that answers my question. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you. I did have three very quick questions, but my second question was one you just asked, so I can strike that out straight away. My first one then is on council tax and collection rates. There's a very good piece within the paper on that. I just wondered, and it's a view, isn't it? Because we can't really tell yet, and given where we are and potentially are going to be, how we feel about collection of council tax, what our forecast end of year might be and what the gap might be. It might be an impossible question, but an indication would be useful. Councillor King?
Start us off and Paul can round it off. I mean, go back to partly the piece I put earlier, which is we're watching it, as you'd expect, month on month. We've got a great revenues team, which is a help. They tend to win awards for getting money out of people in a relatively pleasant kind of way. But the current, this will be week 27, just give you a couple of facts really. So on council tax, 61.25% has been collected. If you go back a year, it was 62.4. If you go back 2, and there's always a bit of oscillation, 62.71. So we're about 1.5 points down at the moment. We normally expect, if I recall this correctly, Paul correct me, about something like 97% or better, 97 to 98% collections, which is a fantastic achievement rate. We're saying now we think it might be 95, but this fits the earlier conversation, which is we know there's going to be weaknesses accelerating in individual and businesses' ability to pay, and if helping, let's take businesses for a moment, if I may, if help businesses through means that instead of trying to, as we normally do, settle in the year, we settle next year, that's a better thing for them and a better thing for us. So it's going to be difficult to judge. We need to look at this in the whole period beyond this financial year, because this is a multi-year challenge. We're going to have to exercise real sensitivity alive to the needs of businesses and residents. We've got a separate paper tonight on LCTS. But if I give you that headline as a feel for where we're at, we're certainly making the assumption, the baseline assumption, it will weaken yet further, and we're just going to have to track this through the year, alive to the circumstances that Councillor Dundas and Councillor Hayter, if you like, pushed our attention to, which we'll have to work out them as we go. Paul?
Yeah, thank you. Before you come in, Mr. Cook, I was just saying that. I mean, one of the reasons for asking is I think that actually aligns what will be, I think, a recommendation from Councillor Bourne very shortly about seeing what's else happening across the county, which would be really useful. Sorry, Mr. Cook.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons we want, more detail in January, because what the only Rathbone thinks, and Jason's with us this evening, we just need to wait till later in the financial year to get a good assessment. At the moment, collection for council tax, although it's slightly down, is holding up really well in the circumstances. But as support schemes for employees and businesses sort of tapering off in their value a bit, we just want to see how that pans out at the end of the year. But hopefully, if we find, we are doing better than the 95%, we'd be very pleased, to improve our assumptions, and it would make the situation slightly less difficult. But I think that's something we can only really look at in the new year.
No, thank you. And I have to say that 95%, I think, given the circumstances, is exceptional. Interesting to see, with a bit of work we do, also what other neighbouring authorities are doing and what they're facing as well. My final question, and it revolves around the same area that Councillor Dundas was looking at, 14.4. When you talk about additional borrowing. Now, again, I absolutely appreciate it. You cannot be accurate about this because we simply don't know. But you talk about additional borrowing, and I just wondered in what areas you think that might be the case. Councillor King.
I defer to Paul on the detail of this. I mean, to me, as I say, I look at I'll just say this. I look at the whole, as you'd expect, we need to look at the whole of the picture of income and expenditure. Curiously, we're doing that. And so the way to look at this particular segment, which is, what provision we might want to be making, does to some degree, only gives part of the picture. So back to business rates and council tax. I hope they won't prove to be brave assumptions. I hope that we'll prove to be just on the cautious side. If so, and there are other illustrations, the cautions throughout the piece, which will perhaps later in the year we'll pull out and make a bit more whole, have to be seen alongside this, if that makes sense. But Paul's talking here about a specific set of costs and charges he knows we are likely to have to meet. Paul, can I hand it over to you?
It refers to capital receipts, you said. I'm particularly interested in that. So yes, Mr. Cook.
Yes, Chair. I mean, we'll come back with more detail on the capital programme in November to Cabinet, no doubt to yourselves, before we set the budget. But capital receipts are part of our financing of the capital programme that avoid borrowing. So that would be both on HRA, right to buy receipts, but we do have some land sales built into our funding assumptions. So, without going into specific disposals, I think this section in the report is just a general caution that, there may be some delays in achieving planned capital receipts. And if so, we would, have to borrow either temporarily or permanently, to replace that funding. So at the moment, it's a sort of general warning, a general risk. Yeah. And obviously, as we get into more detail in the capital programme, we could come back and be more specific.
Yes, I think that would be useful, just so we know where you are feeding the peach, as it were. That would be useful just to know. So thank you. That's all from me. Can I just check with any other panellists whether they wish to ask any further questions? No, I'm conscious we have the leader. Leader, did you want to add anything? You don't have to, but do you want to add anything at this stage?
Not at this stage. On the next report.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. So we have 2 items here, 2 actions required. Can I just say thank you to Councillor King and to Mr. Cook as well for answering what were quite detailed questions, actually, and what was a very good paper. So the way I intend to take this is the first one is to review the progress. I think we can do that just on a quick vote. And then Councillor Bourne, I'm going to ask you on 2.2, where we're commenting on the Cabinet meeting. I think that's where your resolution could come in if you're ready to go with that. Because I think that's something we can just send as a note to the Cabinet so they know the action that we are taking. It's not for them to do, but informing them what we intend to do. Is everyone comfortable with that? Good, okay. So in which case we'll do 2.1, which is to review the progress of the budget and also the MTFF. Mr. Howell, could you administer the vote, please? Yes, so you're agreeing to review or not?
Yep, right. So panel, I shall read through councillors' names in alphabetical order. Please either vote for, against, or abstain. So, Councillor Bourne.
For.
For. Councillor Dundas.
For.
For. Councillor Hayter.
For.
For. Councillor Hogg.
For.
For. Councillor McLean.
For.
For. Councillor McCarthy.
For.
For. Councillor Whitehead.
For.
For. Mr. Chairman.
For.
For. I make that a unanimous vote, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So 2.2, Councillor Bourne, did you want to read your recommendation, please?
Yes, to call upon Essex authorities to compare the local government income compensation scheme data submitted to MHCLG, thereby enriching benchmarking and other data used for budgeting and improving our assumptions.
I think that's brilliant. We require a seconder. Who'd like to second that? Please. Councillor Hogg, I saw you first. Thank you. So we'll administer the vote in a second. And what I suggest is this goes as a commentary note to the Cabinet so that they know what we're asked to do. Okay. Right. Can I ask you please to administer the vote, Mr. Howell? And I'm sure Councillor Bourne will furnish you with the full words at some appropriate moment, but we've all heard that. We know what we're voting for. Could you administer the vote, please?
Yes, of course. So once again, could I get everyone's votes for, against, or to abstain on this? So I shall go through alphabetical order. Councillor Bourne.
For.
For. Councillor Dundas.
For.
For. Councillor Hayter.
For.
4, Councillor Hogg.
4.
4, Councillor McLean.
4.
4, Councillor McCarthy.
4.
4, Councillor Whitehead.
4.
4, and Mr. Chairman.
4.
4. I make that a unanimous vote to approve that
Yes,
recommendation.
Thank you. Now, we haven't put a timeline on that, so presumably one of the officers will take that away and discuss that. It would be useful to have that back as soon as we can, so we can do some comparison. What we're asking for, which you've clearly gathered, for everyone listening, is for us to do some comparison, for us to look at some of this work. Obviously, Mr. Cook may like to be involved, and we wouldn't want to do anything that jeopardises relationships. That's also very important. But I think Councillor Bourne, it gives us a good chance. She's absolutely highlighted something there very important, that we know what other local authorities are doing. And it's not that it's competition, but see how they're doing with the 95%. That's very useful. And I think if that could go as a note to the cabinet, attached to the cabinet papers, so although they're all here, but just formally so they know what we've asked for. Lovely, thank you very much indeed. That concludes then item 10. We'll go to item 11. Thank you, Councillor King and Mr. Cook. The next item is the COVID-19 recovery business case for council efficiency and transformation. Again, I think a very good paper. We have Mr. Block, and I think the leader, who will be setting us off on this. So again, on the principle that we have read the paper, just ask you to draw out points or anything that's been updated since it was written, and then we'll go to the panellists. Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley, and I'm happy to pass to Councillor King shortly. I just wanted to introduce this paper, or a pre-introduction really, because it's such a serious paper in the circumstances we find ourselves in. It's regarding recovery, and it's regarding transforming the council in a number of ways going forward to respond to the crisis that we've had, and how we look forward, not only with a second wave, but with less support going forward in terms of the government income support grant. So this is a recovery paper, and it's a business case for the efficiencies and the transformation processes and programme that we want to go through. I say want, we are having to go through this programme. And really what I wanted to say to begin with was thank you to all of the staff that have been involved in this, not only the finance team, not only Richard and the other assistant directors underneath his process, but thank you also to David working with the team, and all of the cabinet members involved in this, as well as members who have taken part in the workshops and the scrutiny panel task and finish group that we had. So there's 5 key themes. First of all, we wanted to be clear on our priorities, what we set in the strategic plan, that everything we did in terms of transformation and in terms of efficiency was based on those key priorities for the borough. Then we looked at efficiency. Of course, we have made this council as efficient as possible over the last 10 years, but we're going to go further, optimize the services we have, again, look at digital ways of making savings. And I think we've offered a number of good, interesting proposals of innovation here to optimize services in the most efficient way. Then we looked at service provision, similar ways of looking at how we can remodel and provide service provision in a way that is most efficient and can deliver savings that we hadn't seen up until the COVID crisis. Also, that relates a bit to the commercial investment into services to make and maximise income. And actually, Councillor McLean's point earlier made me think about how we're doing that in order to invest and change and look at how we ensure we get more commercial income, how we change services so that they don't cost as much, but we still deliver good quality services and we get back as much as possible. So those are the main themes, including communities as well, where we have learnt through COVID how much, if we enable communities, they can do themselves as well. So forms of devolution, forms of learning, skills and working. Community 360 really come to mind in the service they've done to this borough and the support they've helped us with coordinating the response for COVID, looking at how we can partner with those key partners further and share services in ways that maybe haven't been looked at before. So I want to reaffirm the fact that we've been as transparent as possible in this process. We've been open with our budget workshops. We've had leaders meetings regularly through the crisis and out of it into recovery, looking at ideas, asking for ideas, and working as openly as possible. David has really championed that, ensuring members have been involved. So we've pulled every lever available to us, and that is in the paper today, working with partners, working with business, and working with members, as you would expect. And that does include in this paper tough decisions. And actually, we'd have even tougher decisions if it wasn't for the income we've raised and the commerciality. I just want to praise once again the staff involved in winning the prestigious MJ Award for Best Commercial Council in the country. If we hadn't got that, if we hadn't sort of been that innovative, we would have a worst case scenario now, I would say. So other tough decisions are raising fees on certain charges that we have as a council, and secondly, job losses. And that, for me, is one of the reasons I wanted to front this paper, because unfortunately it does mean we will lose staff as a result of this transformation programme. And that, for me, is a sad day when we lose staff, because we've got such an excellent staff body at Colchester that means we're an ambitious and forward-thinking council. So I thank everyone's involvement in this, and I hope you find it a worthy paper. Scrutiny, I'm sure, will find some issues and raise them with us, but hopefully you find it is a decent paper and shows how we have tried our best to not harm any frontline services, to protect our borough, protect our people, and make us as efficient as possible. Thank you.
Leader, thank you very much indeed. I would just remind panelists we've had a very good advisory note from the Monitoring Officer. Just take heed of that when asking your questions. Councillor King, did you wish to add anything?
Very briefly, Chair and panel, just 3 points or so. As the paper says, this is cross-cutting and corporate budget strategy under 5 themes. We did discuss this back in June, so this is an approach that's consistent with how we started off, which is to make sure we're joined up, looking at things in a thematic way for best benefit, trying to avoid what happens in every organisation, which is silo thinking. Really important for me, essential, is that change of this kind is owned by the organisation. In my view, it gives you the best prospect of changes that will last and that are made alive to their impacts. Those are described in these papers, and we'll take obviously your views and questions on that in a moment. I have to be, on our collective behalf, most focused beyond the people impacts, which are also in my portfolio, on the money, 2.1 million by 2024. So this is a really substantial first step, and we have more work to do, as the earlier budget paper described. Couple points of clarity I need to bring out, Chair. I've heard questions about the use of language like business cases. There is no carelessness on our part and using what might seem crisp language. We absolutely understand, and the organisation understands, that this is about people, but we want to be business-like in judging the impacts, the possibilities, and where else we might go. And a piece of clarification as well, that 20% of the impact is frontline. This should come out through the paper. The balance is a mixture of commercial additional income and back and support services. The bottom line is 20 staff will be at risk of redundancy. We're absolutely not, as I say, careless about the impact on people and their families. Staff will be redeployed into other roles if and when they become available. Any staff who become redundant will be provided with a package of support, including coaching, training, and support to apply for other jobs. And for those concerned at that number, I just sort of say that we would hope in CBC as elsewhere that the passage of time will help. People will leave, people will go, organisations change. That 20 FTE staff at risk of redundancy is certain, I think, to reduce a little, but I don't want to make a false promise. You know, this is what's on the table now, and we'll continue to keep it under review whilst we proceed towards implementation. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor King, thank you. Just before we go to the panellists, can I just ask any cabinet member, and again, you don't have to, but is there anything you wish to pull out from your area of the council on this paper to the panellists? No, okay, fine. And I'm going to, we do. Sorry, is there a hand?
Sorry, I just noticed Richard Block had his hand raised.
I was going to come to the officers in just a second, so bear with me if you don't mind. So I was going to ask the assistant directors, of which there are many here that, well, I say many, the ones also for these areas, and I'm just going to ask you each in turn whether you wish to add anything. So, Mr. Block, let's start with you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I won't repeat anything that councillors previously have mentioned. I would just say that this is the most serious and sizable budget challenge that we've had to deal with, well, certainly in a very long time within this council. And as such, you know, there's a serious set of proposals that are in front of you. I would say, I'd echo the point made by Councillor King that we've taken a non-siloed approach to this process. We've looked across the organisation with each assistant director leading a theme, and you can see the initial results in front of you. I would say, again, the impact on staff, this is the hardest thing as a manager that I think you ever have to do. Certainly not the reason why I came into local government service to do this type of thing, but, you know, so we do this with a heavy heart and bring these proposals with a heavy heart, as we know, you know, these people, their backgrounds, you know, their families. So it is really difficult stuff. And I just emphasise the sensitivity that we're approaching this with our staff, with our people. We've started formal consultation with those people, with the trade union at a very early stage, far earlier than legally we'd have to, because it's the right thing to do, so that we can actually help them shape these proposals, understand the impacts, and indeed we're bringing these proposals early to yourselves as well. So, you know, there's a period of formal consultation that would follow with staff in the winter, leading up to final approval by Cabinet, and another look at this by yourselves leading up to January next year. That's all I'd say, really, apart from taking any questions, obviously. Not sure if colleagues want to add anything, other assistant directors.
Thank you, Scott. Well, that's very kind. I'll just go through, and again, you don't have to, but if you'd like to draw anything out before we start the debate. So, Mr. Doyle, anything you wish to add?
Nothing to add, Chair, but happy to take any questions.
Lovely, thank you. And Mr. Rathbone?
Hello, no, nothing to add other than we are really, there's a few posts going from the customer area as well, and as Richard said, we are managing right the way through the posts of the staff that are at risk and trying to keep vacancies held so that we don't lose staff as such. So there are some vacancies in there, and we're just trying to do everything to avoid redundancies at all cost. Thank you.
Maggie Jones?
No, nothing to add at the moment, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. And Lucy Bredman?
No, nothing from me, thanks.
Right, colleagues, thank you very much indeed. That was very good. And again, a very well set out paper, I thought, and very, very easy to follow on what is a very difficult subject. So this is the order this time. Councillor Whitehead, Councillor Hogg, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Hayter, Councillor McLean, Councillor Dundas, Councillor Bourne, and then me coming in at the end. So let's go to Councillor Whitehead first, followed by Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair, and yes, thank you again for the report. It's a really, really comprehensive and clear report, I thought. I have several questions. Maybe I'll just kind of focus in on a couple. I mean, this report starts by pointing out that there is no alternative than to set a balanced budget, but there were possible alternative decisions that could have been made, and I would just wonder if that were considered and rejected. I just wonder if you could give us a flavour of some of that and what they were and what the value of those might have been in terms of financially, just to kind of give us a sense of what, you know, how we've arrived at where we are. My other question is around the redundancies and the impact of that. So I mean, first of all, the report talks about redeployment where possible. 20 posts expected to be lost, and redeployment where possible. I just wondered if you had any sense at this stage how many or what proportion of those posts we hope to be able to hold on to, and how many we think it's likely that we would ultimately end up losing. The report talks about certain teams having reductions, contacted support, resource team, finance, people in performance. So I mean, I guess the other aspect of this question I'm interested in is the potential impact on the remaining workforce. Clearly, we are in a very difficult financial situation and have to reduce our costs. But I think there's always a danger in these situations that that workload then increases for the people who remain. So I guess I'm wondering about any reassurances you can provide around that side of things. And this also links, I think, to in the report it talks about fewer staff being required in licensing and building control because of reductions in demand. And so, I mean, I'm wondering, is that how kind of cyclical is that issue? Is it a product of the fact that we are where we are at the moment? And does that potentially give us a capacity issue in the future? How do we think we see that developing over time? And finally, sorry, this is turning into quite a long question. Finally, as it impacts on the housing team, that's certainly one area where the report notes that this may well have an impact on the service provided to end users. So I'm just wondering if you could give us a flavour of how you see that impacting on our service users. Thank you.
So I think that was a four-pointed question, I think is the best way of saying it. So Councillor King, maybe start with you, or lead it, depends how you wish to play it, and then perhaps you want to put it out to which officer or cabinet member you think would want to back it up, if they want to at all. Councillor King, maybe start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Glaucon. I counted about 5 in there, and that's a multiplex question. Brilliant the way you got away with that, Glaucon. Let me start on the last couple of points, and then a generality about choices. And I'll ask Richard if he would to sweep up, and I'm sure portfolio holders will have a view to add to my own. I think the last couple of points really are around the risk, the capacity risk. And what we do in a pretty lean organisation, where will it leave us if life turns out to be too different to the expectation? Well, the obvious answer is, as now, we'll have to make a judgment. So the principle that cabinet members and the senior team are agreed on, which is you have to monitor as we go. Some of our choices may change before we get to the final position. Some of the pressures we see may disappear. We may find some new ways of doing business. There's some in prospect, and others being looked at. So this is the best we know now. All of it, including after implementation, has to be subject to the realities we see. And obviously, the tighter the financial circumstances, and they are tight. This is first bite. It's Richard's earlier point. We've got to go back to this in the breathing space that we're going to create for ourselves next year by use of reserves and pushing down on other spend, but to go back to this again. And unless circumstances change, unless government are able to take the choices to help local government, we will have another big bite, and it will have to impact, in my view, it will have to impact the organisation. That's for then. For now, what we've got in front of us is the best we know, and it reflects a lot of thoughtfulness. And as I say, bear with me, my earlier point, I keep saying it's owned by the organisation, really critical. So they can judge those risks. We as cabinet members have a good sight of them and can have a good conversation about it. This is the best we know, and I think that covers your last couple of points. If I go take your first one, which is around choices, Richard will probably give you some detail. But for me, we were always united as an administration and senior team, as anybody on the panel would be. We do least harm to services. We do least harm to reputation, which service is linked to. We bear down where we can across the whole of the piece. There's lots of decisions, including not proceeding with works that were intended this year, and the call on reserves. They're all a set of interlocking judgments, Lorcan, and if you bear with me putting it that way, which have got us to the point of saying, okay, that's not enough. Where else can we go? So for me, it's an iteration, but I'm sure Richard could add an extra flavour.
Thank you, Mr. Block.
Thank you, Chair. Just dealing with the first point about alternative proposals. You know, one of the biggest areas of expenditure within the council is our frontline neighbourhood service, and you will not see any proposals within what's in front of you that looks to reduce those services. You know, it's a multi-million-pound service, 200 FTE plus, significant proportion of our workforce that we've actually, you know, we haven't gone there because it's just it's so difficult to deliver that frontline service. Any of these changes are going to be difficult. I wouldn't want you to think they're not going to be, but that service particularly, I think, is one that springs to mind that, you know, we considered, certainly as you'd expect us to, but actually excluded that because of the obvious impacts on frontline service. In terms of the point about redeployment, you know, it's difficult to say how many we'll be able to. Just to give you an update, even over the last week, one of our colleagues who would be at risk as part of these proposals has found alternative employment, not with the council, but outside, which, as far as I'm concerned, is good, because that's someone who's not going to be unemployed. They've got employment and all of the security associated with that, and we'll keep a track on that. And just to give you reassurance that in terms of any recruitment we do as an organisation, there is a weekly discussion at our senior management team meeting where we cross-check, you know, should we recruit, and absolutely redeployment, internal recruitment is the name of the game at the moment, wherever possible. So we will do everything to avoid that number of redundancies being any higher than it needs to be. In terms of, you know, some of the proposals to reduce staff and the impact on the remaining staff, I would say that the proposals by and large are, they come out of changes that we've made, and actually this council's got a track record of digital transformation that particularly, you know, led by Leonie Rathbone's area, which enables us to do things more efficiently, to minimise the impact then of taking staff resources out of our organisation. And we will continue to do that. I mean, colleagues can talk about any particular examples, and I wonder if Mandy Jones would like to talk about the housing item, and also Lucy Bredman regarding the licensing and building control proposals and the income question that you've got, as they're areas that both of those ADs are responsible for.
Mr. Brock, thank you. Well, I think that was a perfect cue, wasn't it, to both of them? So, Mandy Jones, do you want to go first and followed by Lucy?
I think the housing item was more in relation to Lucy Bredman's service area, so I'm going to defer to her on that one.
Okay, all right. So, Lucy Bredman.
Okay, so with the building control one, I think again that's a really it's a really interesting one, because we're actually holding vacancies there. So I think it was mentioned earlier, Leonie mentioned that in some cases we're just going to not recruit and see what happens. But with something like building control, obviously they generate income. So if the demand goes up, or it's not as we suspect, that we have less demand, we can reconsider and look at recruiting, because they will be generating more income. But at the moment, we're going to hold those vacancies rather than be in a position to make redundancies. With the housing one, I assume we're talking about the noise. Was that what you were referring to? So the weekend noise service and the impact on residents. And again, that's, as Richard alluded to, because of COVID, we've actually changed the way we work. So the lockdown meant we couldn't go out. So we've been working in different ways. We've been working with our customers, talking on the phone, digitally, talking to them. And actually, we found that in many cases, we don't action the complaint that we get until the next working week anyway. And despite complaints rocketing, there wasn't really any issue at all about when we then actioned that. So we're looking really at how we work during the COVID period, and whether that can make efficiencies ongoing, really, and whether that can change the way we deliver services going forward. And that's one that feels like it can work in a different way.
Thank you. So Councillor Whitehead did getting 5 questions into one. That's not to be emulated by all of us, if that's okay, but well done, Councillor Whitehead. That was brilliant. Let's go to Councillor Hogg next, followed by Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. 2 comments, really. I think that this is going to be very difficult to pull this one off across all 4 of these papers. But I think our comms team are going to be very busy, and I do hope that they put out to the to our residents just where this is all coming from. I've written on the top of one of the papers, "Nothing is sacred," and that is obviously true. I just hope that we can come out the other side of this with a damage limitation exercise in our communities, because it's in the communities where we're going to first hear people scream when things can't be done or that they're expecting. Somewhat concerned about the impact on licensing, in particular, those of us on licensing, and I'm sure that Councillor House would have a view on this. They are extremely busy and a very diverse panel. So I'd be very concerned. That really does need looking at closely as to whether that can be, are there any real savings there, rather than making a saving then having to go back and sort problems out. So my concern is selling this to, or offering this to the public in a way that is clear and concise, and they understand just where we're coming from, and that everybody involved in this, officers and councillors, are doing this because we have to, not because we want to, and we want because we have to. They need that clarity out there to understand exactly where we're coming from and where we're headed to. So I'll leave it at that, Chairman.
Hogg, thank you. I think more of a general comment, but I think there was a question there about presentations to the public. I'm guessing the question could be wrapped up in what would the public notice if all this would come to fruition?
Well, they'll let us know, Chairman. I can assure you that.
Oh, they'll let us know. I think we're trying to preempt what they're likely to feel and see.
Yes.
King?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Sorry. Yes, points well made, and we all take it, as Richard said, to heart. 2 things to add. Remind ourselves that the numbers of frontline impacts are relatively small. The majority of these savings, each one of them matters, is going to be in the background, in the back office support, and or is going to be an achievement through income raising. And of course, as described, we're trying to modify this or mitigate this by looking at vacant posts. So I characterize this as pressure, undoubtedly, on our people, pending better. But I want to add one last point. I made it earlier, which is the assurance that we will keep this under review. We have to, we will do. And it'll be coming up from the organisation, and Mike, you're absolutely right. It will be what we hear from members and from the public. So we're just going to have to work our way through this. And I just sort of say soberly, my instinct is this is a manageable level. It's easy for me to say of additional challenge to a well-run organisation. I am more worried, if I'll be frank, about what follows afterwards, because we've got to get our way through this, and then we've got to go back round this again next year, unless the circumstances change. But capacity review, Mike, we'll keep it under review, and we'll respond as best we can as we go. We'll communicate it as well as we can as we go. Thank you.
Yes, I think communications with not just the public, but members too, which you have been brilliant.
Yeah.
So that would be useful. Let's go to Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. I think a number of members tonight are going to be talking about the redundancies, and let's be brutally honest, everybody that works at this council is an asset to the borough. But I'd like to talk about the 8 vacant roles that are being deleted. A bit of a facetious question, I guess, but do any of them really need to be filled? But we're choosing not to, because it's easier to keep those roles vacant or delete them than making a member of staff redundant elsewhere in the council. And my second question would be better establishment control. Richard, I think you briefly spoke about this, and I'm sorry if you're going to be repeating yourself. But what does this really entail? What will make the approval process for new roles more robust? And why wasn't that the case anyway? Were we just creating roles out of nothing, really? Again, facetious question, I know.
Yeah, all questions are important. Councillor King, can we start with you, please?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, Sam. We take them, the points as you've given them. Let me take the first one and I'll ask Richard to talk about the process. Taking vacancies occur in every organisation. Let's just talk the logic through. It happens here. The thoughtfulness that we've required of the ADs and the organisation has been to say, what's the pain that will come from not filling? So it's not being treated any differently. It's, can you cope? Can you manage? What's the impact and the effect? From my perspective, and I'm sure from the managers, it's an opportunity, but it still has an impact. Now, that means that organisation is going to continue to have to deliver what the requirements are placed upon them, sometimes quite testing requirements in testing times. And so it's still a judgment about the strength and viability of the team relative to the service. That's how I would see it as a manager in past lives. That's how I see it now. It's how the team have looked at it. Richard, I know that given it's a lean organisation, you're not cavalier and you have a process for creating posts, but perhaps you could take Councillor McCarthy's second point. If that's all right, Chair.
Yes, no, carry on. Absolutely fine.
Thank you, Chair. Just to build on Councillor King's point around vacant posts, and to reassure you, Councillor McCarthy and panel, we are still filling posts where there's a genuine need to fill them, to be able to run the organisation and provide services to our residents. There's just an additional layer of control in that the senior management team are considering every post that's filled. And that, I'm afraid, will have to continue. And that is that better establishment control. In previous times, there was a certain amount of autonomy, so we could be quite agile as an organisation, and it would sit just with services. I think, as Councillor King has said, this is the first iteration of what we might need to find in terms of savings, depending on the financial situation as it emerges. We've heard quite a bit about different scenarios. My sense is we're going to need to keep that more closer establishment control as we move forward over the coming months, and that is what the establishment control point's about.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to Councillor Hayton, followed by Councillor McLean. Councillor Hayton.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was very, very well laid out, very straightforward, easy to understand. I've got no questions that haven't been asked already.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Very good report. Obviously not what we're all wanting to see or hear, but you have to ask every member of the public in our areas, would they miss the service we give? Now, when you think about it, you're all trying to do the best you can in a terrible situation. And I think the worst case of any employer is having to lay staff off. You hope it comes voluntarily. So, I have to sympathise with everybody. And, and I just feel, we need to be looking at this differently and approaching the members of the public differently in saying, we have to make cuts. And it is really unfortunate, but where do we cut and what can we do? It's like any business, you have to balance the books in some form of or not. So, we are put in a terrible position, but I have to say I'm pleased to not see more cuts or more expenses put on. So I think we need to be mindful of where we go and how we put this out to everybody, because, we are dealt a terrible blow this year. And it's going to take years to recover. So as long as we can keep it to the minimum of what we have to do, good luck with it all.
Okay, so I think that was a general statement rather than a question, and I don't think that unless anyone particularly wants to come back. In which case, let's go to Councillor Dundas, followed by Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. There was a good challenge there from the council leader for the panel to raise some issues. Incidentally, I didn't think Councillor McCarthy's question was at least a bit facetious. I thought it was a very good question. I started off with 7. You'll be glad to know I've whittled it down to 4 basic questions. I'll rattle through them very quickly, and then perhaps we can pick up on them. My first question is, I mean, we know that we're not the only council in Essex facing similar challenges. I know it's always a controversial issue, but has there been any looking at or studies or consideration or conversations as to whether there are any service provisions or anything anywhere which perhaps could be shared with or worked with our neighbours, where basically, you know, we can cut the costs of a service but maintain that service to the residents? Secondly, on car parking, we all know that, I mean, you know, if you want more revenue from something, unfortunately, you can't just put up the prices. It doesn't work like that. In terms of the actual demand versus price on car parking, are we confident we know where we stand in terms of, for example, if we put up car parking 10%, does that result in a 1% cut in demand? Does it result in a 5%? Have we actually analysed or done some research as to where we think we are? Because the worst thing in the world would be to put up the prices, have the numbers come down, so we've got less visitors in the town and no more revenue. We really don't want that. And also whether we've actually done some comparison with particularly Colchester and Ipswich. I don't know what they charge for parking, or how they would go there to ensure that we're still competitive, because we are competing with them to get people into the town. We can't deny that. About the market, we're talking about expanding the market. I know last year when we looked at, I think either in Scrutiny or Governance and Audit, there were a few problems with the market, that it wasn't getting the revenue we were hoping for. So it seems quite ambitious now to say that we're going to actually be able to expand that a lot, particularly if we're taking that into car parks. So my question is what are we going to be doing different, which we weren't doing a year ago in a good economic environment or a better economic environment, that we're confident that we'll be able to expand that market a lot more? And my final question is, we've got in there £150,000 of saving on procurement. It's a very easy thing to write, save money, procurement, but it's not always that easy to implement. I just wonder if you could give some very specific things you're actually doing different in procurement to bring that £150,000 saving. And I suppose the other question is, why weren't we doing them before? Thanks.
Okay, Councillor King, there we go. Well, I did say multiple questions, but that was 4, not 5, so we'll probably get away with it just. Councillor King.
Thank you very much. I'll ask my colleagues to come in on some of these. Councillor Lilly knows inside out the great work that's done to look at the points of price sensitivity and competitive position. And I would think Dan Gascoigne, if I can make the suggestion, if he is there, will be well placed to talk about our comparability and the prospects of shared services and further innovation. It is touched upon in the paper. Dan's deeper into that than I think some are, although no doubt others have got something to say. I think I will just make a couple of brief points and then hand over. The first one is, these are really good questions, certainly on procurement, and there is an answer which we'll get to. You're right, it's not just about saying it. None of these are just about saying it. We're sensitive all the time at the council to the fact that we, in this borough, do have competition, and it's a neat trick to sort of drive down cost and push up service. But there is a good track record. I'll pass to Mike Led, if I might, first on car parking. The one point I sort of say here, and it's aimed at the chair slightly, is he will know we're in the middle of an interesting conundrum about how to balance wanting to be safer, greener and healthier and push active travel. And people tend to think that, you know, price is the way that you can do that. So we're trying to balance a general approach, to be serious, here, in which we get this close to right. But Mike Liddy might want to pick up on that, and then we'll just pick it up with officers, I think.
Yes, that's a very good slogan, by the way, I have to say. Councillor Lilly.
Indeed.
Yes, thank you, Chair. That's very good. Councillor Dundas, yeah, he's got it right. Actually, it's it's an incredibly hard thing to do, to work out how to make everybody happy, which you never do. But with comparisons, we always compare, not just Ipswich, but Chelmsford as well, and other areas around Colchester. And Richard Walker actually looks at parking strategy all around the country to what other counties and towns are doing, so that we can look at see if we're working Colchester. And I can honestly say that for the last few years, we have been the cheapest in around the North Essex, in Chelmsford and in Ipswich, of car parking charges. Although some people would have you believe that we're terribly expensive, and they would rather drive to Chelmsford or Sudbury or Ipswich and pay slightly more, and also they're using a lot more petrol, but they don't think that that counts towards that. The parking strategy is going to arrive soon. We're working on it at all the different tariffs, and the easiest thing in the world is to actually put the cost of the parking up to cover our costs, because we have lost an awful lot of money in car parking income. And has a knock-on effect, because we use it for ongoing schemes, maintenance of car parks, doing other things, and stuff like that. So the question is, do we go for the greener, better Colchester, smog-free, that cuts out congestion by putting up car parking charges? Or do we try and look after retail by cutting the cost but increasing car usage in the town? And I think that the strategy that we've agreed on, it goes against, we will probably go with the greener, the issues and stuff like that, and that car parking will probably go up in different areas, but we are moving towards the My Permit schemes, where more offers will be put in place through that, which we've done previously in St Mary's and St John's, where we've had the afternoon car parks. We know an awful lot of people have signed up to those schemes on My Permit. It's working really, really well. And of course, it's a benefit for us because it cuts out all the cash charges. But we have got an awful lot of strategy come forward. It involves a lot of things. It could involve pay as you leave, which everyone used to love, of course, years ago. And if we could have the cameras in, we could use number plate recognition. So you would only pay for what time you have in a car park, which is fantastic in that. So there will be rises in some of the car parks. We hope that it'll go up in the mornings with times of congestion. More people should be using the park and ride scheme. They should be using the buses. And what we'll hope to do is slightly make the outside car parks cheaper, so people walk into town rather than come into town using their cars. We could be here all night talking about parking. As you know, I love it. The only other thing that we've got coming in that's different is we are working on an app on My Permit with the bid. So we hope to have this in place before December, and that if you park in Colchester and you shop in certain shops in Colchester, you can get money off your parking by building up a bonus scheme, which is the way that Wales have done it, and we've copied their scheme down there. And we hopefully that'll be the future of car parking in the end, and also help those businesses in town. We need more people to sign on in town to this new innovative way of doing things. We've got to convince them that sticking an A board out is not the way to attract people into a shop. They probably still think that it does. They probably still want their A boards back when they won't do nothing else. But the future is it's more electronic, it's more My Permit, and it's more working with apps in that. But I'll leave it there, Jeff, otherwise I'll be here all night.
No, Councillor Liddy, thank you very much indeed. I will resist the urge to go on for another 4 hours about why this is important, but there's other things to talk about. And I actually should declare the interest now, because now we talk about safer, greener, healthier. That was my slogan. I should actually declare the interest of Essex County Council. Thank you. Councillor Dundas, any other officer wishes to come in on his points, or have we covered them?
Richard needs to come in on
Mr. Block, yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Block.
Yeah, it was just on the thank you, Chair. It was on the shared services point.
Oh yes, yes.
So there, as you will see, there are some proposals to share services. These are generally our back office services, and indeed you may not be aware, we already do some sharing. We have a shared payroll service with some other councils, and we're looking to build on those relationships to look at other sharing of those back office services. I guess the big question, and it links to the conversation we had earlier on whatever the next stage might be, could we go further and look at sharing other services to mitigate costs and ensure we've got resilience as we move forward. And absolutely, I think as a senior management team, we'll be looking at those opportunities. In terms of procurement, again, that's an area that sits within the budget strategy theme I've been leading on. And you are right, it's very easy to write a figure into a table and say that you're going to save money. What we're doing differently is that, again, previously we had quite an agile service-based approach to procurement. We're taking a bit more of a corporate approach. So I'm chairing a procurement board where we are actually having a gateway process to review every significant procurement at key stages to really make sure that we're first of all, using the right sort of procurement methodology to get the best deal for the council, using our buying power, looking at maybe shared procurement with other councils, other organisations, looking at different procurement methodologies to be able to get the best bang for our buck. So I think that's the biggest difference. Previously, it was more of a service-based approach. We're pulling it in and making it more of a corporate approach with as I say, a senior management team lead overseeing those significant procurements at every stage. And that was it. Thanks.
I'm going to move us on. Thank you. Councillor Bourne.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to say that I do think these reports that have been provided today are extremely useful, very easy to read. Even though the content isn't easy to read, the actual presentation makes them easy to read. And I would thoroughly recommend that this is a way of doing things in the future. A lot of the things that we've been asked to look at in Scrutiny Panel and other committees have been brought about because of COVID response, yet in some ways that's sharpened up our practice too. But I don't want to make a comment, which I just have. I better ask you some questions. I was going to ask quite a few questions about car parking, but Councillor Dundas seems to have asked all of those, which is great. But I do want to come back to the idea that there are possibly mutually exclusive events in putting up car parking fees and detracting tourists and visitors from our lovely town. And that is quite a well-held belief on social media and other outlets, but we have passed a climate emergency motion, as Councillor Lilly has already alluded to, and Councillor Bentley, your safer, greener, places strategy is something we have talked about in the past pre-COVID, and trying to get the right balance between car parking income and that kind of modal shift. So I don't think we're there yet, but I just wondered, it's a bit like Councillor Dundas, really, where is the balance? Where do you draw the line? And I think actually that leads on to lots of other things in this budget paper, which is nobody wants to pay more for a service that they previously enjoyed as free, or a service that they previously enjoyed at a price that they liked. And I think that is the challenge for local authorities. I think in this paper, it has been presented very well. And I think it's up to the administration to hold the line on some of the things in this budget paper, because by not holding the line, you will open the council up to more of a gap in our budget forecast. There are just, another comment or question really about, I noticed in the communities paper, there is, it mentions a different way of working rather than lots and lots of savings. It doesn't particularly expand on that, but later on in the resources paper, it talks about different ways of delivering services, which could be insourcing. And I wondered if those two could be joined up, whether there is an appetite for looking at joining those up by those portfolio holders or officers, and looking at community wealth building, which recognises the challenges, contemporary challenges of today, and particularly the financial difficulties that local authorities are having. It seems to me that we haven't really seriously looked at community wealth building. And if we're looking at insourcing, taking services back in-house, particularly with notice, 2023 is the deadline for our grounds maintenance contract, then we have plenty of time to start working with our community groups to start thinking about how we could really actually make that happen. And I just wondered with officers and portfolio holders what the appetite for that is. Thank you, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. So Safer Greenier What's It tells me I need to up my marketing a bit, I think. Right, so there's quite a lot in there, quite a lot of comment, but there were some questions around there. And I wonder whether, Councillor King, we could start with you and then bring in whoever you think is appropriate to follow up, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Tina Bourne. Recognise those threads, and let me try to sort of cut to the chase in the sense about all of them. I think some of them are worth a conversation away from here. Community wealth building is, as you will know better than many, a big subject, but it holds some real possibilities. May or may not hold much in the way of savings, because it can take nurturing care and attention. But it's the right kind of subject. With the officers listening as well, we'll take that away to have as a cross-check, shall we say, on where we are and where we stand. The climate change, safer, greener, healthier, what's it, and all of that. All I would just sort of say, and it's a sort of serious point, is as an authority, we'll have to do both what you've said, which is hold the line on change, including uncomfortable change. Otherwise, you know better than any, although I was 1 yard behind you in terms of garden waste. Let's just mention that subject briefly. You know, we collectively, just put it that way, balked at doing what was uncomfortable. We can't keep doing that, or we'll never balance the books. So we've absolutely got to hold the line. But we can, in parallel, do what you're suggesting we should, which is continue to challenge ourselves and look at what the possibilities are. I think in terms of safer, greener, healthier, and changes of pattern, it's a real truth that some of those changes in pattern will be expensive for this local authority and others. They're not going to happen quickly. Modal shift, sadly, as a cyclist, is not going to be the fastest of things to happen. People will rightly continue to need and use their vehicles. We will rightly continue to take what we can from the market, whilst keeping an eye on the impacts and the way that Councillor Lilly described. And if you're content, it's up to you, Councillor Bourne, to leave us with the charge to go back and look at some of the principles you've flagged to us. I hope that might be a reasonable response.
It'd be good to see some of that work, because I'm sure we shall in the future. If I could just finish off, I just want to draw together the strands of what Councillor Dundas and Councillor Bourne were just talking about there, because I just wondered, have we done a piece of work that talks about the future ways of working? So when things get back to as we understand them to be normal, are we going to expect our staff to be in the office 5 days a week? Are they going to be coming in 2 days a week? or whatever the case may be. Now, if that is what's going to happen, have we done that piece of work to establish what services, because we've just been running the entire council for the last 6 or 7 months without going into the office full time. And therefore, that's going to free up, I would have thought, quite a bit of office space. Are we talking to other public sector bodies and indeed other local authorities? Can we share buildings and either get income from it or reduce our outgoings by doing so? And my second point is, have we done a thorough index of the estate, the council estate, what we own, what should be disposed of, what should be enhanced, and what we could share in the future as well? Because, I mean, this is a very good paper, by the way. I'm just thinking, I don't recall seeing those two particular bits, and I think I would like to see a report that says ways of working for the future, and I don't think I've seen that. But I might have missed it. You can tell me, Councillor King.
Let me start, and Dan or Richard can pick this up, or other colleagues. Take the last piece, as states is kind of in my patch, though everybody has at least one hand or foot on it. There is, you'll be unsurprised to hear, a property register. There is an asset register. It's going through a review at the moment, and the questions you've asked, I have asked the team as well. They are hard pressed on managing, there's only a few of them, all the commercial challenges we're having at the moment, because we've got quite an extraordinary large index of property and holdings and interests, all of which help us fund our services in today's world. So on that, absolutely yes, it's a slow process, but absolutely yes. Those are the questions that we're asking, including exploitation of them in a more effective way. It's not just about, as you will understand, releasing them and selling them and gaining a one-off income. It's about exploitation and making the most of them. And if you can't use them, often there's patches of land. Can we plant some more trees on them? Can we do some more wilding? Can we have some more naturalizing, which may link to some of the earlier remarks from members about what do you do in the future in terms of community working? Well, the answer might be we have to look at what we're going to do first. It's not just, it's the outputs and the intent we have as much as who we work with. All of that's in a circular conversation, some which has started in terms of grounds and maintenance already ahead of those kinds of decisions about who you contract with. In terms of Rowan House, I'll just start this off because I asked the question only a week or so ago. How many people have been into Rowan House? The number may have changed, Richard, but it was 15 instead of 350, and was growing to 50. That's the last soundbite that I had. So absolutely, all the plans and thoughts, as from my understanding, are up for review, including the ways in which we use the estate, including, one of our prime pieces of it, Rowan House. But either Richard or Dan, I think, might want to come in on this.
Thank you.
Yeah, Chairman, I was just going to say a bit about the broader budget strategy, just to tie together a few of the comments that have been made about sort of what next. Just as a reminder, I think in terms of the budget strategy, part of the thing I think Cabinet were clear about in June when the budget strategy was set on these 5 thematic cross-cutting areas. Part of that was about ensuring that we could reach this point today, really, where we've got some clear savings that have been developed, I think, in a safer way by looking across services. And protecting the front line, and those are in front of you today. But it's also about setting a strategy that provides a more medium to longer term sustainability for the council, because we see that the budget impact goes way beyond this financial year. So that is very much underway as well. In fact, we've got a much longer list of budget opportunities which aren't in front of you today because we didn't deem them sufficiently safe and deliverable at this point, but they will provide benefit down the line. Things like in the commercial strand, there are a number of bigger ideas for projects which are very much at the scoping phase at the moment, but which will be coming before you in due course. There are opportunities in service provision, as Richard's indicated. We've got some modest savings in there today, but there are much more exciting opportunities, I think, which will come through. In fact, one of the side benefits of the whole discussions around local government reorganisation is it does mean that there is some collective data being gathered across Essex, at least, which we can all draw upon to draw some evidence-based conclusions about shared service opportunities, for example. But actually more important, probably the most exciting part might be the community strand, which, although there are savings from the community service, which are baked into the themes around efficiency and service provision, actually for the community's theme, we don't have huge numbers, because again, it would be wrong, I think, to deliver hard savings from that area, or indeed to enter the conversation with communities based on a savings exercise rather than an opportunity to find a more sustainable balance between citizens and public services like the council. So I think that's going to be, again, part of the more medium-term strategy, and very much more transformational actually for the council, working with our system partners. So I just wanted to give a bit of that context in terms of the more medium-term plan. But I think Richard, sorry, just going back to the point immediately beforehand, I think Richard has certainly been dealing with some of the discussions specifically about Rowan House, if you're interested to know a bit more about that.
Well, ways of working. Mr. Block.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair. A very good point about the use of our office accommodation. I think 15, even Councillor King has gone down further. I've been to the office this week just to check in, and I think it was probably 5 maximum within the office. We have made space available for people who are really struggling to work from home. There are some colleagues who have very difficult domestic circumstances, so we have made some provision for them within the office, but there's a handful of them. It does, we've got a large building, we've got a lot of desks, so you're absolutely right, Chair, as well, to point out the prospect of talking to public sector partners. And indeed, we've got a really good network of public sector partners. Pam Donnelly, who I think is on the call, has connected myself with a number of those partners, and I've started conversations to almost create a coalition of the willing, people who are up for looking at their estates in a different way, bearing in mind what the new normal is going to be. So I do genuinely think there's some opportunities moving forward for us to both share some sort of back office space, but I think what I'm more excited by is perhaps the prospect of shared sort of space for frontline services, certainly on those services that support our people, our more vulnerable people. If we can get people working together in the same location, supporting those vulnerable communities, then I think the benefits could be massive.
Mr. Brock, thank you all for that. I think what I'd like to see, I don't think what I asked was existed, and that's a ways of working paper. You can only do that in consultation with staff. I know a lot's going on, but I think if we've got to start planning how the council looks when we come back, is it won't be the normal that we knew, and I don't get a sense yet we know what that's going to be, and I think we could start that work now. And I think from that, once we have conversations with other public sector authorities, you could find fee income or less outgoings as a result of that. And I think that piece of work just needs to be done, and I don't see it unless it's sitting there and I haven't seen it. And if it is there, I'd like it to come back to scrutiny. Councillor King. Just on mute. I don't know if the clock's going off, but...
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say we're not there yet, from my perspective, but absolutely that work started. So the conversations which have to be, as you say, with the team, I've been talked to Jessica Douglas, known by many of you, has been looking at, with colleagues, with team members, to establish, as Richard said, those who are in challenge because of the circumstances they're in, and those who want a different way of working. So there is already, a gathering, if you like, of a view which may change over time, and we're already clear we're not going back to the world we're in. So that's just one simple thing to say. That then gets you into, and it's being explored now, what might that mean when you still want connectivity between people, and people still need to see something of each other. So it's it's a promise, it needs to be addressed, it will be, but it's also to say some of that work's already started.
Good. Well, I think that's fantastic. Thank you. Can I just ask then, perhaps Mr. Block speaks to Mr. Howell? I'll come to you in a second. And we set a date in the diary for the leaders, lead members, so we can perhaps plan that piece of work into our programme. So I think that would be fairly critical. Mr. Howell, you wanted to either say someone wants to ask a question or tell me something?
Yes, just wanted to point that Pam Donnelly has had her hand raised, as has Mike Lilly, and Councillor Corey has his, as well as Mandy Jones.
How do you see that? Because all of those got the camera switched off, unless you're looking at the other thing that I have access to.
Mr. Chairman, do you have the participant screen open?
I don't. No.
If you open that up, it should.
Right. Okay.
Should
Fair enough. I'll leave you to do it because I'm trying to run the meeting. So let's go to Pam Donnelly first then.
Thank you, Chair. But actually, the moment has now passed in the sense that I think the issues I was going to raise have already been dealt with. Thank you anyway.
Thank you. Was there somebody else, Mr. Howell?
There was Mandy Jones.
Mandy Jones, come on down.
Thank you. I think it has already passed to a certain degree, but I just wanted to build on Councillor King and Dan's points around the commercial theme, and actually that, as outlined, this is about maximising income across all services. So there are some ideas emerging in relation to that theme, and that's particularly around reviewing our assets and reviewing our physical assets, which would be a question. So I think we're looking very thoroughly at that and looking at emerging ideas that come out from each of our assets and building on those and seeing how we can maximise them as much as we can.
Thank you. My view is in every disaster there are some opportunities. We just need to go and find them. Right, colleagues, I'm conscious of the time. So can I thank everyone that we gave that a really good going. I think that was fantastic. I'm going to move us straight to the action we need to take, which is 2.1, to note the proposals to Cabinet set out in the business cases and Appendix A, and all actions necessary to prepare to implement them prior to final approval by Cabinet in January 2021, and to consider whether to make any recommendations related to these. We mentioned a couple of things there I think we could note down, certainly that work that needs to be done. But on that basis, and on the basis I think we should also add a note that goes to Cabinet to say we think these papers are excellent, very difficult things to write into what we're trying to say, but actually the clarity of them I thought was excellent. If we're happy with that, colleagues, that's what I'm suggesting. So when you get to vote, you can have a comment as well. Can I just ask Mr. Howell to administer the vote, please?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chairman. Righto, so usual procedure, I shall proceed in alphabetical order through names of councillors. Please give me your votes for, against or abstain. So Councillor Bourne.
For.
For. Councillor Dundas.
For.
For. Councillor Hayter. For. Councillor Hogg. For. Councillor McLean. For. Councillor McCarthy. For. Councillor Whitehead. For. And Mr. Chairman. For. I make that a unanimous vote to approve.
Thank you. Now, colleagues, when I say colleagues, I include officers in this as well. I'm conscious it's 5 to 8. We should be taking a break at 7:30. We can have a 10-minute break now. I think the next paper will be quite quick, so for speed it might be easier to carry on and finish the meeting. But if you'd like to take a break, please could you indicate now, and then we can make a decision. Or are you content we just carry on to the next paper? I'm seeing no objections, so let's carry on. I said I don't think this particular paper will take very long, because what we're being asked to do here is to verify things, an annual basic report back on the local council tax support scheme. I think, do we have Jason Granger here?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Jason should be here. Yep.
Lovely. Oh yes, I beg your pardon. Yes, Jason, I can see. Is this you, Councillor King, that will take us through this politically? So perhaps we can start with you, over to Mr. Granger, and then any questions we may have. We're coming up to 8 o'clock, so we're trying to beat those chimes.
There's only a few moments to go, Chair, and it's well worth waiting for. This is, as you know, a cyclical exercise, and we can do this, in my view, briefly. I'll pass to Jason, if I may, seamlessly in just a moment. What we have here is continuity of a position in my time and before, in which we've got a relatively generous local council tax scheme. If we have an intent to change it, we have to make that notice plain. Thus, it's before you before it heads onwards. The only thing I would want to bring out, beyond the fact that it continues to be a relatively generous scheme, is the obvious one, which is in times of hardship, and we're heading into them, more people are going to be impacted and more people will need to call upon this support, which makes it yet that much more important that we maintain it. If I may, I'll pass to Jason for additional supplements and any questions you may have on the technicality.
Thank you, Councillor King. Thank you, Chair. Just to summarise, this is presenting a scheme that will have no changes other than the national prescribed changes to uprating. It will not reduce or increase entitlement. It will provide the same level and consistency of support for residents from the 1st of April 21. Due to the timeline, we have to start talking about it now to have the scheme agreed by full council in December to give us the time to implement this. In the spirit of the papers tonight, I'll take the detail to be read, but available for any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Granger, thank you very much indeed. Now, panel, I'll come to each of you. As I said, it's for me to tell you what to do, although I would say this is something I would actually be concurring with Councillor King, something we need to be doing, and it is something that comes to this panel every year. But that should not stop you asking questions if you wish. I will go in this order. Councillor Hogg.
No questions, Chairman. Happy with the paper.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Likewise, happy with the paper, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hayter.
Yeah, happy with everything there. Thank you.
Councillor McLean.
Happy with the paper.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
He's having some IT issues at the moment.
Right, okay. Councillor.
I think the paper, as it is every year, Chair, is excellent, and sometimes we dismiss it because it is so excellent and it doesn't get what I think the scrutiny it deserves, but it's difficult to scrutinise something that is so excellent. They are very, very good decisions that we make and are supported by the whole council on our local council tax scheme, which help the most vulnerable in our town. And I think that is well worth hanging on to. That's when people say, oh, we can't do this because we spent money on that. You know, yeah, you know what? We spend a lot of money on our local council tax support scheme, and that makes me really proud.
I agree with every single word, and you're right. When something is so good, you sometimes don't scrutinise it because you don't need to. It's right to pull out these points. I absolutely agree with you. Councillor Whitehead.
I just have one four-part question this time, Chair. No, I'm only kidding. No question for me. I wholeheartedly endorse Councillor Bourne's comments, and I think this is absolutely the right policy for this council.
Yeah. In which case, now Councillor Dundas just tells me his computer's decided to have a reboot in the middle of this, so we'll press on without him. In which case, we have two actions which we'll take together. The first is 2.1, which is the panel is invited to review and comment on proposed local government council tax support scheme commencing 1st of April 2021. We in effect have just done that, and our comment is, I think you heard Councillor Bourne say it is excellent, and I think we all agree with that. 2.2, such review and comment will be considered ahead of the Cabinet meeting of the 23rd November 2020 and the full council meeting of the 3rd of December 2020, where approval of the scheme will be requested. I think we can put both of these through and do that at once. So you're voting on 2.1 and 2.2. Mr. Howell, could you minister the vote, please?
Yes, of course, Mr. Chairman. So starting off, Councillor Bourne.
4.
4. Councillor Dundas. I shall put him down as not being present for this one. Yes. Councillor Hayter.
4.
4. Councillor Hogg.
4.
4. Councillor McLean.
4.
4. Councillor McCarthy.
4.
4. Councillor Whitehead.
4.
4. And Mr. Chairman.
4.
4.
I think you put Councillor Dundas down and put brackets was rebooted. Close brackets. Yes. Okay, for that vote. Right, okay, colleagues, thank you. Item 13 is the work programme. Now, the lead members met and we concluded at this stage we don't need to add or subtract anything. We are conscious some work is being moved across to audit and governance. We do have some space in March, and as time moves on, we will fill that. But I think, given where we are with this current emergency on the virus, I think we should give ourselves a little bit of breathing space and slack to deal with emergency stuff that may come through, or papers like this we need to deal with before we get to the end of the municipal year. That was our view as lead members. Do people concur with that, or does anyone have any other comments or phrases? phrases, comments or things they'd like to say. There's plenty of phrases. Right, okay, colleagues, thank you very much indeed. In which case, that brings us to the end of the meeting. Can I thank all the officers who've turned up and for all the work you have done. You didn't all get to speak, but it doesn't matter. You've come along, and thank you. To all the cabinet members who came along, can I thank you as well. As ever, the Democratic team have been great. Mr. Howell in particular has been superb. And to Councillor King and the leader as well, thank you for the work you have done and the honest answers you have given to every question put to you. And to the panel, thank you as well. It's been great seeing you, and we'll see you again at the meeting. That concludes the scrutiny meeting for this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chairman. I should imagine you've had